Okay, so this is the episode 1 of the supplementary series. This is Dr. Khalifa, and joined with me here today is Dr. Ayman, research fellow.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Happy to have you here, Dr. Ayman.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Okay, so today we're going to discuss the research questions and the literature review. So I'd like you to help me out and help our students out in this endeavor. So, please.
So we're going to study we're going to discuss two main topics today. The first of which is the research question and how to formulate it. And when thinking about the research question, you need to think about research in general and how research is done. And there are two realms, as I like to think about, that research is based on. One is the realm of the possible, and the other is the realm of the desirable. And your research question should aim to be somewhere in between. And that's what we're going to help you. We're going to help you today to arrive at that exact location.
Okay, wonderful.
So the first step would be to decide on a general topic of interest. And this could come in many ways. It could, for example, come as something that you've come across and became genuinely curious about, something that you've seen somewhere, sometimes on TV, on the news, on the radio. It could be a problem that you've seen in your clinical rotations, something you've seen in the real world, or something that happened to people you care about and your loved ones. It could also be an advice from a mentor, somebody you trust. Or it could be from coming across a problem while reading in the literature. And all of these are valid ways to arrive at a topic of interest, something that is general, and that helps you identify a specific point you want to study. Once you decide on a general topic of interest, try to formulate an open-ended question, something like, why is adolescent health important in Saudi Arabia? What are the occupational hazards for migrant workers? Do the elderly suffer a lot of fractures? These are general questions, but they serve as a starting point for the next step. And the next step here would be to educate yourself about your topic of interest. Because your writing will be read by a lot of experts in the field, or a lot of people who are concerned with the topic that you're writing about. And you can't inform the people specializing in an area if you don't know a lot about it yourself. And how do you come about knowing about your topic? That comes by reading. So the first step would be to do a thorough reading of the literature, starting from review papers, systematic reviews that will give you a solid background, and then go to specific studies. Look at the citations in the papers you read. So while you're searching, there are always information listed in the review papers, something that will catch your eye that you need to look at individually. And then after that, it would be helpful to conduct your own research in databases of primary literature like PubMed, like Google Scholar, as I'm sure you already know how to do. So after doing this, after you read through papers, you can identify gaps in the knowledge. You find limitations and future directions, which a lot of papers helpfully try to explain to you. And it is also advisable to read articles with similar methodology to the paper or to the study that you're trying to do, as it will help you plan your own research. Because nobody starts from zero, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So it helps to really see what have been done before you attempt to do something new on your own. Number 2 would be to look at conferences where new findings are presented. And that would help you identify topics that current researchers are interested in. The things that are the front line of discovery. And it would also help to contact experts in the field for advice. And this would either let you know that your topic maybe is already being studied or nearing publication, or perhaps help you find collaborators and people who can be your mentors, people who could guide you, and perhaps be your colleagues in your project. Searching the literature is a very extensive topic. And if you would like to refresh your idea about how to search in PubMed, how to search in Google Scholar, I advise you to refer to the How to Read, Find the Full Text article. That is a PDF that has been prepared by my colleagues in the Cat Hub course page on the Notion page for the Cat Hub.
All right.
Now that you have a general topic of interest and you have read extensively on your topic and around it as well, and you have a solid idea, you can now attempt to identify a specific question. And in order to do that, you formulate a close-ended, direct, and measurable question, something that is straightforward and something that you can test and you can study. So narrow down your broad research question by considering what you learned from the literature. Use the PICO framework to ensure that your research is specific, and the FINE framework to ensure that it should be pursued. And perhaps one of these is familiar to you, and the other ones we're gonna explain today. So to identify a specific research question, first is the PICO. Just to refresh, the P stands for the population you're trying to study. The I is for the intervention or exposure you're exploring. The C is for the comparison group or the control. The O is the outcome that you are measuring.
Okay, so a question here, Dr. Ayman. So when the students know about the PICO from their critical appraisal years, and they're very good at identifying the PICO. However, what's the difference between appraising a study and figuring out the PICO, and between trying to create a proposal with regards to this PICO thing?
In this case, when you're reading a study, you try to use the PICO in order to simplify or categorize what the researcher is trying to do. But when you're writing your own proposal, it helps to keep the PICO in your own mind in order to make sure that you're specifying all the details, the specific details of your population, your intervention, your comparison, so your study would be doable. And when reporting this PICO, and this, I mean, when we say PICO, we don't necessarily mean that you should report it in this way. And generally speaking, this is not the standard in reporting. Mm-hmm. But what we aim to do is to make sure that you have all the correct components in your research question.
Yes. So when they're writing a proposal, they should focus on writing the research question as a statement that is clear and coherent. They can use the PICO in their mind to decide on how the question is written, but for the purposes of submitting a proposal to the college, to the ethical committee, it would be professional and part of the scientific writing process to write it as clearly as possible in a statement method.
I see, yes, that's exactly right.
Do you have some examples about these PICOs as research questions?
Yes, we do have a few in the next slide. And of course, you need to keep in mind that the PICO will vary depending on the kind of study that you're mm-hmm. trying to do.
True.
So when we look here, if your study is interventional, for example, and you need to identify, the elements of the PICO, it's quite straightforward, as we have explained. But when you go, for example, in a study for diagnostic accuracy, study for prognosis, things might look a little more different. For diagnosis, for example, our intervention is not a treatment, but is an index test or a new test that we're trying to compare to the reference test, which is here the comparison, which is the gold standard. And the outcome would be identifying the illness. And if we look at the example on the far right, the example is asymptomatic patients. In asymptomatic patients, is CT chest superior to PCR in diagnosis of COVID-19? So in this, we can, in a straightforward fashion, identify what is the patient population, that is the asymptomatic patients, what is the index test, that is CT chest, the reference test is PCR of COVID, and the disease is COVID-19. So as you see, this statement has all the components of a PICO question, but it does not list them, does not put them in a list.
All right. So this is a wonderful table. So for the purposes of their project next year, which is a cohort, they'll focus more on the last two, so the prognostic and etiological studies. So their research question needs to be tailored somewhat around this. The current fifth year, they're doing cross-section studies, so it would look more like the one you just explained, so the diagnostic accuracy one. Okay, so they should focus on the prognostic, etiological, make a research question, and submit it.
Right.
Wonderful.
And you can refer to this table at your own leisure because it has very important information. So in step 3, identify the research question, we have assessed how we use the PICO. And then in order to make sure that, or to ensure that your question is worth pursuing, it's useful to look at the FINE framework. And the F in the FINE refers to feasible. So you need to know that if that your study is feasible, meaning that it's doable, means that you have the tools, the capabilities, and the time to be able to finish it. So for example, looking at the resources that will be required, the time needed, the sample size. It's useful to do a preliminary calculation of sample size to know how many participants you need and whether you're able to curate this sample before actually attempting and then starting the study.
Okay.
The I in FINE refers to an interesting and relevant question, and this basically means that your study has an impact on the current body of literature, something that either would change how practice is done, or add a nuance to that, or perhaps add a new understanding to something that we have a poor or incomplete understanding on. Because otherwise, the research would not have any value and would be very unlikely to be funded and then published. The N stands for novel, and that means that your article or your research question should add new information and not reiterate what has already been found. E stands for ethical, and that your study is not violating any international laws. Let's see a few examples. I think that would make things a little more clear.
Yes.
So, for example, I came up with this question. I want to ask, is fish good for you? I think this is a very good question. Maybe a lot of people are interested in it, and it's a topic of everyday conversation.
Mm-hmm. True.
But is this a good PICO question? What do you think, Khalifa?
Well, I can see a lot of faults with this question. So the first one I can recognize is the population. So what's the population here? So use not specific population.
That's exactly right.
So we need to tailor that a bit more. So let's say for medical students, for example. Okay, so we identified the population. Now there is also the problem with identifying what is the intervention exactly. What type of fish are we speaking about? Mm-hmm. So is it fish or is it fish like salmon, or maybe we're discussing other types of seafood like
I don't know, the squid.
Yeah, or octopuses.
Who knows?
Yeah. So we need to define the intervention. Okay.
And maybe also the amount of fish, right? Because is one fish good for you? Do you need to eat, fish for 3 meals a day?
True.
Yeah, we need to specify the amount as well.
So you need to specify the amount. Maybe you specify a certain material that's in fish, like omega-3. And you need to define the outcome. Okay. So what is the definition of good? I know sometimes this gets like, you think, okay, why are these people trying to go really niche in the topic and identify things? You need to be specific so that your research comes out very coherently. People can accept supporting your research and work with you to find an outcome. Okay, so we need to find what good is. So is that an increase in, for example, in
I don't know, physical activity,
maybe
fitness,
or a decrease in cholesterol level?
Right.
So these are things that they need to keep in mind.
Exactly. And if you put a big question like this, you'd be at a loss when you're designing the trial, because you would have no idea how to measure how good is, right?
True.
And it would be very difficult to defend your findings, when it comes for review.
Sure.
And let's look at another example. This is a good example. Is physical height associated with academic performance among college students? I think this is an excellent PICO question. It has the population set, the college students. It has an intervention or exposure in this case, which is the physical height. It has an outcome of academic performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has a comparison, people who are not as tall. But when we look closely at the FINE framework, I guess you could say it's feasible. It's ethical.
Is it interesting?
It's novel.
Yeah.
But is it interesting?
Yeah.
Does it add anything to the medical literature?
Mm-hmm.
I think we all agree a resounding no, because this finding, even if it was found to be significant, would not add anything to the practice of medicine, and would just leave all the reviewers saying, who cares?
Because this is a repeated topic, so you find something that is niche, and you do that by doing a proper literature review to refine your research question.
Exactly, and think of the intended recipient. Once you have your study ready, you need to make it useful for the people who will read it.
Right.
Now moving to the literature review, I'll give the stage to my colleague, Dr. Khalifa.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ayman. Actually, I'd like to discuss with you some points. So, to start, there's this quote by Jordan B. Peterson that I like, which is, "Be precise in your speech." And so, to tailor it to our topic, be precise in your writing. So when you're precise in your speech and in your writing, you're more likely to identify the truth. You're more likely to say the truth in your literature. And we will describe what that is. So that means that you will give both sides of the argument. So papers that are supporting your viewpoint and papers that are against your viewpoint, you'll discuss them in your literature review, and then you'll refine your research question. Okay, so what's the focus of a literature review? You appraise the recent important literature, and I think you guys already know this appraisal headache from the previous years. You summarize topic relevant knowledge. So you look at stuff like, for example, in the occupational health or the migrant health or adolescent health, and you become more knowledgeable in that topic, and you summarize it down so that it's of benefit to you and anyone else who reads the topic. You need to address controversies in scientific research. That's what we meant by be precise in your writing. Okay, so you take both sides of the argument and you identify where the gap is and you try to fix it. You also provide an article resource list, and this will be beneficial later when we discuss the manuscript organization. So the literature review that they do now can be important later when they finalize their paper and write it for publication. Yeah, and the final part is I think is the most important part, which is the scientific method to identify gaps in the literature. Okay, so if your research answers this question, answers the gap in literature, it would be more useful than trying to report something that's already been well studied. Okay,
and this is good for everyone, right? It's good for you. You'll fulfill something you have aimed for it to be valuable, and it would help you at all stages. It will help you achieve a good funding, and it will help you achieve publication at the end.
True. So the idea is, if you think clearly about your topic, if you can think clearly, and if you achieve that thinking, then you'll be able to write clearly. To do that, you need to be knowledgeable about the topic, right? Many researchers get rejected at the proposal phase or at the idea phase because the researcher or the doctor did not prepare well enough to convince the other party of the argument. Okay, so there's a logical structure, and you can discuss with me, Dr. Ayman, because every person has his own way of writing the literature review. So my way is to start with a good introduction. So if the background or introduction does not captivate the reader, I don't think the rest of the paper will. So in the introduction, begin, for example, with a problem. So I start by stating what is the problem in the medical community or in the particular topic that I'm looking at, and then I try to describe how this problem occurs at different population across the globe, and then start to narrow it down into the certain region where I am located in, where I'm conducting the study in. So that's for the background. I usually end with an aim in the background if it's the final manuscript, but in the proposal phase I will leave the aim for later. So at the second part, after I'm done with the background, which is around 3 paragraphs, so paragraph for describing the problem at a global scale, then at a regional scale, then at a local scale, I start adding the research question. And these we divide them in 2 parts, so primary and secondary questions, and we should follow what you discussed previously in the PICA format. So when you get into the body of the literature review, which is termed as the review part, I would divide the paragraphs into distinct ideas and then give each one of them headings. So if I'm describing a medical topic, that would be, for example, the etiology, the pathophysiology, the diagnosis, and management. Okay. If you're describing something that's about migrant health, you describe the population that you're going to study, how this particular problem is affecting this population, what are the solutions that were given before, what can you do to help, or what have been done to help in figuring out this problem. Okay, and then you end by giving the aim in the body of the literature. So that's the last paragraph. Now, each of these paragraphs do not have to be distinctly incoherent. So you need to connect these paragraphs. So the first idea needs to connect with the second idea and the third idea. Okay, that will make your paper more readable and better received when it's given to a proposal committee or an ethical committee.
Right, perfect. Mm-hmm. There's one thing I wanted to add to that. I completely agree with Dr. Khalifa about the introduction background, because making this kind of structure would give the proper context for the question you're trying to ask. And even if somebody has no background about the topic, after reading such an introduction, would understand why your question is important. And that's why it's also important not to use a lot of jargon and a lot of and not assume that the reader understands as much about the topic as you do. So when you write an introduction, try to address it to a person who does not have the background on the topic, because this is what the introduction is for. It aims to give a background for somebody who is not familiar. So use simple terms. Try to start from the beginning. Help your introduction be both a way to introduce a topic for somebody new, and to make an argument for somebody who's already familiar. I do have a question, Khalifa, about the headings. I do understand that these headings are for the author, right? But will they be a part of the final draft? Okay. With each paragraph.
Okay, so this depends on what kind of topic you're writing. So if it's a topic with a lot of literature review needed, it's probably best to keep the headings within, so that the other person who does not know about the topic can, okay, I need to know more about this part. What's the heading? And he reads it and he goes directly to that paragraph. So I think it's better to leave the headings inside the paragraphs. Like we said, you finish the review by mentioning the study aim and summarizing the findings and gaps in the literature. And of course, you supplement this by the references. For the next slide, you need to take a snapshot of this, because you might need it when you are writing your literature. It's useful to use a variety of words so that people do not get bored of reading your paper. Okay, so that it doesn't become mundane. All right, now a few technicalities. So you can just keep this part and just take note of the information on the slides. So these are what I use for my slides, and these are very common in the research writing and scientific research writing. So font times New Roman size 12, spacing of 1.5 with margin justified. You use bold only in headings and subheadings so that you do not distract the reader.
Yeah, if you want to emphasize something, emphasize it in words. Do not need to emphasize it in formatting.
Yes. So you use one line space between each subsequent paragraph so it doesn't look cluttered up. Of course, this is a common problem, which is people are starting to use a lot of abbreviations. When I read proposals that are made by students, they start to use abbreviations that are known to them, but not known necessarily to the reader. So they need to define the abbreviation at the start. This abbreviation need to be the common abbreviation for this word or list of words. Okay, although I do not prefer to use abbreviations when you're writing scientific papers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if you can avoid the abbreviation, avoid it, because it just adds unnecessary confusion, and really the benefit is not worth the risk of confusing your reader.
Okay, so we're not trying to tell you to be like top writers or best-selling authors. We're trying to tell you to write more clearly so that everyone can understand what you're speaking about. Okay, so preferable search engines for undergraduate research would be PubMed and Google Scholar, as they are easy to have. They're easy to search. First of all, you're familiar with them, and they have citation files that you can use on EndNote. We're not requiring you to go and search the grey literature. That's a bit advanced. Well, if you go and read about it and do it, that's like an excellent point. Why not? Yes. So next, you can take note of this slide. So this slide is about using brackets. Okay. So a simple note that you can remember is that when the numbers or the percentages are the subject of the sentence, you should not use the brackets. Brackets are used for any information that you can delete and read the sentence without them. So if you can see the last line, the majority of early and late cases received vancomycin. I can read the sentence with or without the information in the brackets. Okay, but in the example above it, of the early cases, 59% were male. This means that this 59% is the subject of the clause. These are just some tips to make your scientific writing better and more readable, and your supervisors will appreciate when you take the effort to do these minor things. Okay. If you're going to use tables, for example, if you're discussing metabolic syndrome and you want to put the criteria, you need to identify what this table is and put a reference for that table. Okay. This will also help you make sure that your table is up to date. It's the latest version of this, for example, diagnostic criteria, and it has a proper reference for your supervisor to read. Okay, to read. Yeah, these are just simple additions. So you need to separate numbers by an option shift with a dash. Okay, I'm not sure how you do that on the Windows computers, but this is not a simple dash, which is the subtraction symbol. Okay, so students would often say 2 to 3 and then use this subtraction symbol, which is incorrect. Okay, use the M dash. You need to check the document for spelling mistakes and grammar before submitting. You can use any application to do this. There are online applications to do this, like the Grammarly, or you can use Word. And as much as I'm not an advocate of Windows, but yeah, you can use Microsoft Office's Word.
You can also use the excellent software of a proofreader. If you just give your letter for a friend or somebody you trust, and they could go over it and notice mistakes that you have not paid attention to.
So if when they do this, their paper becomes better, and their supervisor will appreciate that they did not waste their time by going after the minor mistakes like these.
Yeah, and nobody accepts a proposal that has been poorly written, regardless of the quality of the content, because it indicates that the researcher did not pay enough attention, is not committed enough to write a proper proposal.
Okay. So the next part is do not put slang words, so aka, i.e., etc. like this within brackets. Okay, you can just mention the thing that you want to mention within the brackets without referring to these. So if you're saying something like the common disease in Saudi Arabia, and then you want to mention them, no need to say IE or EG within brackets. You just put a bracket, you can put them there, so diabetes, obesity, so on, and then you close the bracket. Okay. When you're listing material within the manuscript, you can use this format, so such as, and then colon, and then 1 and 2 and 3, okay, or blah blah and blah. Yeah, you just replace it with any word and it will work fine, hopefully. All right, so this one is for the references. So you need to reference anything that is uncommon knowledge, and what we mean by uncommon knowledge is that it's a niche topic. So medical literature is uncommon knowledge. Something that's that wasn't published 30 years ago is considered recent knowledge. So it's uncommon. It's not known yet to the entire human population.
Right.
Okay, so you need to reference that information. More common topics would require you to narrow down your reference date. So within the last 10 years would be better for topics such as diabetes or hypertension. Okay, so the referencing style we use for medical literature is usually the JAMA style, or the Journal of American Medical Association. So you find out the 11th edition style, go and download that for your EndNote application, which we'll speak about in a minute, and use that citation style. Okay, so per every statement you need to give 1 to 3 recently published references. No need to go over that number, as this is a proposal. Okay, of course, here's the thing: when they put the references, they should look at the original reference. That means that they do not just read the abstract. They open the article, find out the references in the article, and then track down the original reference of the information.
Right.
Okay. So if you do not do that and put the abstract as the reference for information that was just written in the abstract, that is an incorrect way of citing information. Okay. That
Right.
will cause a problem.
That means you always cite the information based on the one who found the information, right? For example, you cannot cite a review paper as evidence, because the review paper is citing primary articles.
Yes, so
you
multiple
need to
review papers.
Yes, so you need to arrive at the original source of the information and cite that.
Unless, of course, they're citing the conclusion of the review paper. So if they're citing the conclusion of the review paper, then that's correct. If they're citing information in the review paper, they need to track it down.
Right.
All right. So, yeah, you put the references immediately after the period. Do not space it. It's extremely annoying. Do not put a space after the statement. Just put the reference immediately. Okay? Yeah, so this is example. The humans landed on the moon, then a reference. The moon landing is US propaganda, and then there's a reference, you know?
Yeah.
And an example of how you need to put both sides of the argument. Okay, so the final part is citations. So our favorite citation app at the research unit is the EndNote X9. Okay, so this edition of EndNote is very good. It's sufficient to do all the things that you need to do. We'll probably put it in the playlist right after this video, so you can just jump into that and watch a video on how to use it. Okay, it's easy to learn, it's easy to work with, especially with your supervisors. It's easy to organize and order citations. It does it automatically. You don't need to do it manually. And it's easy to change the citation style if needed when you're trying to publish in a journal who asks for something else other than JAMA, for example, Vancouver style or APA style.
Yeah, have you tried to change the citation by hand? It's a painful that I wouldn't hope on my worst enemies.
Yeah, although some people might disagree. Yeah, another alternative is Zotero, so it's free for everyone. It's a headache for someone using a Mac for some reason, and they don't care about us, I think. But you can also use it for Google Documents. So, and if anyone is using Google Document with their team, they can use Zotero. It's easier than EndNote in the Google Document particularly, but EndNote can also be used in online documents. Yeah. So finally, you could use any of the amazing programs above, learn something new, you know, or like my colleague said, you can just do it manually.
Yikes.
Yeah, like the savagery of pre-technological advancement. Yeah, that would be a great idea. And then your supervisor will ask you to change a reference, and then you'll have to do it manually and change all the numbers in the manuscript.
Yeah, or you're not accepted in a journal and you have to apply to another journal, or you have to change them again, or to reorganize your references, take up part of the introduction. Just save yourself a lot of time, a lot of mental sanity, and use a citation app.
So the main objective of this supplementary course is we're sharing our experiences with you. So we were medical students not long ago. And as we progress through the research, we're giving you the hardships we face so that you do not have to go through them again. You just get the end goal, and then you start from there. Okay? All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Ayman, for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
This was wonderful. Assalamu alaikum.